third party broke down yesterday. She realized he was only using her to forget you, and now she wants revenge. My beloved child. Yesterday, something finally shattered inside the third party, and it happened because she discovered a truth she had been desperately trying not to see. For weeks, she had noticed the distance in his eyes. The conversations that suddenly became shorter. The way he could sit beside her and somehow seem emotionally miles away. She kept telling herself he was simply tired, confused, or distracted. But yesterday, one small moment destroyed every excuse she had been making for him. He said something without realizing how deeply it would expose him. It wasn't your name. It wasn't even a confession. It was worse. Because in that moment, she understood that whenever he tried to build something with her, he was quietly comparing the feeling to what he once had with you. And suddenly, one terrifying question entered her mind: had she ever truly been chosen at all? That question followed her until she finally confronted him. She wanted reassurance. She wanted him to look directly into her eyes and tell her she had misunderstood everything. Instead, his silence became the answer she feared most. He didn't defend their connection with conviction. He didn't tell her she was imagining things. He simply looked away, as though admitting the truth aloud would force him to face something he had spent months avoiding. And that was when she broke down. Because she finally realized she hadn't replaced you in his heart. She had become a distraction from you. A place he ran when remembering you became too painful. But here is where everything changed. Her heartbreak didn't remain heartbreak for long. It turned into anger. She began replaying every promise, every affectionate moment, every time he made her believe there might be a future. Now she was asking herself whether those moments had ever belonged to her, or whether he had been trying to recreate something he lost with you. And then she noticed one detail that made that anger much more dangerous. After their confrontation, he didn't chase after her the way she expected. He didn't panic about losing her. Instead, he became strangely calm, almost as though the truth being exposed had finally removed a burden from his shoulders. Don't skip, because this is the moment she realized the situation was bigger than jealousy. His reaction told her that part of him might actually feel relieved that pretending was becoming impossible. That realization changed something inside her. She stopped asking how she could make him stay and started wondering who should pay for the humiliation she now felt. And in her emotional state, her attention slowly turned toward you, even though you had never been part of their private choices. But before she could decide what to do next, she discovered something he had quietly done after their confrontation, and once she understood why he did it, revenge was no longer just an angry thought. What she discovered next was the one thing she never expected him to do so quickly. Instead of trying to repair the damage between them, he quietly began removing himself from the life they had built around each other. Nothing dramatic. No explosive goodbye. Just small, deliberate choices that spoke louder than an argument ever could. He stopped making future plans. He pulled back from conversations that once kept her reassured. And then she noticed something that made her stomach drop. He had revisited something connected to you that he had deliberately avoided for a long time. Maybe it was an old memory, a photograph, a saved message, or simply a place that reminded him of what he lost. Whatever it was, she understood the meaning immediately. The moment their relationship cracked open, his emotions didn't move closer to her. They moved back toward you. That realization changed the entire confrontation in her mind. Suddenly, she remembered all those strange moments when he seemed happiest with her and then became distant without explanation. She remembered certain questions about his past that he carefully avoided. She remembered how his expression changed whenever someone mentioned a relationship that truly mattered to him. Now the pieces were connecting, and she hated the picture they created. She began to suspect that he hadn't entered this connection because his heart was completely available. He had entered it because being alone forced him to remember you. She had unknowingly become a shelter from feelings he refused to face. But something even more painful was becoming clear: the distraction had stopped working. No matter how hard he tried to move forward, some part of him kept circling back to the same unresolved person. You. And now she wanted to know whether he had already made a decision about you behind her back. So she started watching more carefully. Not because she suddenly understood him, but because heartbreak had turned into suspicion. She noticed how protective he became of certain private thoughts. She noticed that when she angrily mentioned you, he didn't respond with resentment. His expression changed in a completely different way: quiet, conflicted, almost protective. That was the final blow. She had expected him to prove that you meant nothing anymore. Instead, his reaction suggested there were feelings he still refused to let anyone attack. Stay till the end, because what happened next pushed her anger into something far more serious. She asked him one direct question about you, expecting another evasive answer. This time, he finally responded. Just one sentence. Calm. Unplanned. Brutally revealing. And the moment she heard it, she realized she hadn't only lost control of him. She may have just discovered what he intended to do about you next. The sentence came out before he had time to soften it. He told her, quietly but firmly, that whatever happened between you and him was never something she had the right to destroy. That was all. But to her, those words carried an unbearable meaning. He wasn't defending a forgotten chapter. He was protecting you in the present. She stared at him, waiting for him to take it back, but he didn't. And suddenly she understood why he had been emotionally withdrawing. He wasn't simply tired of their connection. He was tired of pretending that choosing someone else had erased what he still felt for you. The truth she had feared was standing directly in front of her now. She had spent all this time competing with someone who wasn't even in the room. But her next reaction surprised even him. She stopped crying. Her voice became unusually calm, and she began asking questions instead. How long had he still been thinking about you? Had he ever considered reaching out? Was there something he had never told her? He refused to answer everything, but his hesitation revealed enough. She could tell there was another layer beneath the story, something he had deliberately kept hidden because admitting it would change everything. Then she asked the question he couldn't escape: if you had the chance to make things right with that person, would you? For several seconds, he said nothing. And sometimes silence reveals more than words ever could. She watched his face carefully, and what she saw there wasn't confusion. It looked like someone who had already considered that possibility many times. That was when revenge stopped being an emotional impulse and became a plan in her mind. She realized she couldn't force him to forget you, but she believed she could interfere before he had the opportunity to reconnect with you. Yet there was one problem she didn't know about. While she was deciding what she might say, who she might contact, and how she could control the story, he had already taken a private step of his own. Something huge is waiting for you, because this wasn't another moment of hesitation. For the first time, he was acting instead of hiding behind confusion. And the third party discovered evidence of that decision completely by accident. She saw one detail she was never supposed to see. And when she understood where his attention was truly going, the revenge she had been imagining suddenly became urgent. She wasn't searching for proof when she found it. That was what made the discovery hit even harder. A small detail appeared at exactly the wrong moment, a name, an unfinished thought, something connected to a conversation he had been preparing himself to have. She didn't know every word, but she understood enough. He had been thinking seriously about reaching out to you. Not someday. Not in some distant future when everything felt easier. Soon. And suddenly, his recent calm made perfect sense. He wasn't peaceful because he had stopped caring. He was peaceful because he had finally stopped fighting what he wanted. She had spent yesterday believing their confrontation might frighten him into choosing her more strongly. Instead, it had apparently pushed him toward the truth he had been avoiding. That discovery wounded her pride more deeply than the breakup itself ever could. Because now she understood something painful, every attempt to keep his attention had only delayed a decision that had been growing inside him. She began remembering the times she had sensed you were still emotionally present between them. Whenever he compared relationships without saying your name. Whenever certain memories changed his mood. Whenever she demanded reassurance and received words that sounded correct but somehow felt empty. She had wanted to believe she was imagining the distance. Now she knew she wasn't. But instead of accepting that his feelings were his responsibility, she began directing her anger toward you. In her mind, if she could make you doubt him before he reached you, perhaps she could prevent the one outcome she feared most, watching him willingly return to the person he had never emotionally released. And that was when she considered doing something he never expected. She thought about contacting you first. Not to tell you the complete truth, but to control which version of the truth reached you. She could make him appear dishonest. She could suggest that everything he felt was temporary. She could twist his confusion into something that would make you question whether opening that door again was worth the risk. But there was something she didn't realize. He knew her well enough to understand what heartbreak might make her do. And after yesterday's confrontation, he had quietly prepared for that possibility. Don't skip, because his next decision wasn't about winning an argument with her. It was about making sure you heard the truth from him before anyone else could rewrite it. And just when she believed she still had time to get ahead of him, she discovered that he may have already made his first move. By the time she realized what his first move actually was, the balance between them had already changed. He had stopped explaining himself to her and started preparing for the conversation he knew he owed you. But he wasn't rushing into it with some dramatic declaration. He was thinking carefully about what needed to be said, what he had done wrong, and why he had allowed fear to keep him away for so long. That frightened her more than an impulsive message ever could. An impulsive person could change his mind. Someone calmly accepting responsibility was different. She could see it in the way he refused to argue when she accused him of choosing you. He simply said that he was finished making decisions based on what helped him avoid uncomfortable feelings. And she knew exactly which feelings he meant. That was when she tried one final emotional test. She reminded him of everything they had shared and asked whether any of it had mattered. For the first time, he answered without hiding. Yes, some moments had been real. He cared about what happened between them. But caring, he admitted, was not the same as giving someone his whole heart. Those words devastated her because they confirmed the truth she had discovered yesterday. She had been trying to build permanence with someone who was still carrying an unfinished connection to you. Yet something else in his answer caught her attention. He never promised that you would take him back. In fact, he seemed afraid you might not. That should have comforted her. Instead, it made everything worse, because it proved he was willing to risk rejection rather than continue using another relationship to escape what he truly felt. Then her revenge plan shifted again. If she couldn't convince him to stay, she wanted to make sure you questioned his intentions when he finally appeared. She began thinking about the most painful details she could reveal, the mistakes, the hesitation, the things he had done while trying to forget you. But before she could decide how far she was willing to go, he said something she never expected. He told her that if she contacted you, she should tell you everything, not just the pieces designed to hurt you. No panic. No begging. No attempt to silence her. That response stopped her cold. Because a person terrified of exposure usually tries to control the story. He was doing the opposite. And then he added one more sentence that made her realize there was a particular truth about his time away from you that even she had never known, and once that truth surfaced, everything she planned to use against him could suddenly take on a completely different meaning. That hidden truth was the reason he had never fully settled into the relationship with her, no matter how convincing he tried to make it look. During the time he was supposedly moving on, there had been moments when he almost reached out to you. He would begin forming the words, imagine what he needed to explain, and then stop himself because he believed too much damage had already been done. The third party had mistaken that hesitation for commitment to her. Now she realized it had been fear. He wasn't staying because he had finally forgotten you. He was staying because facing you meant confronting everything he regretted. And when he admitted that, another painful detail slipped out. There were nights when she thought his silence meant he was thinking about their future, when in reality he had been wondering whether you had already built a future without him. For a moment, even her anger couldn't hide how deeply that hurt. She asked why he had allowed her to believe something different. He didn't make excuses. He admitted that being wanted by her had made it easier to avoid feeling rejected, lonely, and uncertain about you. But what began as comfort had slowly become unfair to both of them. That admission was exactly what she had demanded, and somehow hearing it made her more furious. Because now she knew she hadn't failed to become enough for him. She had been placed inside a battle that existed before she arrived. Yet instead of directing all that anger toward the person who had made those choices, she kept thinking about you. If you never heard his explanation, she reasoned, perhaps he would eventually give up. And that thought gave her revenge plan one final opening. But then he did something that removed the advantage she thought she still had. He told her he wasn't going to approach you pretending nothing had happened. He intended to tell you the uncomfortable parts himself, the avoidance, the mistakes, even the fact that he had tried to bury his feelings by becoming involved elsewhere. He understood that honesty might cost him any chance of reconnecting with you, but he no longer wanted a connection built on hidden information. That was when she realized threatening to expose him might accomplish nothing. He was preparing to expose his own mistakes first. Stay till the end, because what happened after that changed her strategy completely. She stopped threatening him. She became quiet, walked away, and made a private decision of her own. And this time, her revenge wasn't going to begin with him. She decided there was someone else she needed to reach before he could tell his side of the story. The person she decided to reach wasn't you, not yet. She knew contacting you directly would immediately expose what she was trying to do, so she chose someone closer to the situation, someone who might influence what you believed before his truth ever reached you. Her plan was simple: plant doubt first, then let that doubt grow on its own. She wanted this person to believe he was confused, emotionally unstable, and only turning back toward you because things with her had fallen apart. But there was one detail she couldn't explain away. He had been pulling away from her before yesterday's breakdown. His feelings hadn't suddenly changed because they fought. The fight happened because she finally discovered where his feelings had been pointing all along. And the person listening to her story noticed that contradiction almost immediately. That unexpected resistance rattled her. She had expected sympathy, maybe even anger toward him, but instead she was asked one uncomfortable question. If he had truly been committed to her, why had she spent so much time worrying about you? She had no convincing answer. Every explanation brought her back to the same painful truth. Your presence had never needed to be physical to affect their relationship. She had sensed you in his hesitation, his comparisons, his emotional distance, and the strange sadness that appeared whenever his past came too close to the surface. Now, for the first time, someone else was seeing it too. Her revenge depended on making you look like the problem, but the more she explained, the clearer it became that you hadn't created this situation. He had tried to escape unresolved feelings, and eventually that choice had collapsed under its own weight. Meanwhile, he had no idea she was already trying to shape the story around him. He was focused on something completely different, deciding exactly how to approach you without demanding anything in return. He knew one message couldn't erase what happened. He knew an apology wouldn't automatically restore trust. But he had reached a point where silence felt more dishonest than rejection felt frightening. Then something happened that neither of them expected. The person the third party had contacted decided not to keep the conversation private. Instead, a warning quietly made its way back to him: she was preparing to interfere before he could speak to you. And his reaction was nothing like the panic she hoped to create. He made one immediate decision, one that meant she was suddenly running out of time to control what you heard first. The warning changed his timing completely. Until that moment, he had planned to wait until he could find the perfect words, but now he understood that waiting carried its own risk. If someone else reached you first with a distorted version of what happened, his silence could make that version look true. So he stopped rewriting the same thoughts in his head and made a decision. When he approached you, he would not begin by asking for another chance. He would begin with the truth. That distinction mattered. He knew he had no right to demand forgiveness after trying to bury his feelings inside another connection. He simply wanted you to hear directly from him why he disappeared emotionally, why he made the choices he did, and why pretending to move on had ultimately hurt everyone involved. But there was still one confession he was afraid to include. It was something the third party herself had only recently understood. During their relationship, she had believed certain moments belonged exclusively to them, certain places, conversations, even little habits she thought proved he was creating something new. But after yesterday, she began realizing that some of those things had roots in memories connected to you. Not because he deliberately wanted to deceive her, but because he had never emotionally separated his present from his past. That realization devastated her all over again. She wasn't only afraid of losing him now. She was questioning which memories had ever truly been hers. And as that pain grew, revenge started feeling less like a strategy and more like a desperate attempt to regain control. So she made another move, this time much closer to you, hoping she could create one misunderstanding strong enough to close the door before he reached it. What she didn't know was that he had finally recognized the pattern. Every time fear appeared, he delayed. Every time guilt appeared, he disappeared. Every time someone pressured him, he allowed other people to influence decisions he should have made himself. This time, he refused to repeat it. He prepared to tell you something he had never admitted openly: being with someone else had not erased you. It had shown him the difference between genuinely moving forward and simply running away. Something huge is waiting for you, because just as he became ready to make that truth known, he learned what the third party was planning to say about him. And hidden inside her version of events was one accusation serious enough to make him stop everything, because if you heard it without knowing what actually happened, you might never give him the opportunity to explain the missing piece. The accusation wasn't completely invented, and that was exactly why it could do so much damage. She planned to tell you that while he was with her, he had spoken as though his chapter with you was permanently closed. There had been moments when he said he needed to move forward, moments when he insisted the past couldn't control him anymore, and she intended to present those words as proof that anything he said to you now was simply desperation after losing her. But she planned to leave out the part that changed their meaning. Those statements usually came when she questioned why he still seemed emotionally somewhere else. He had been trying to convince himself as much as he was trying to reassure her. Now he understood how terrible those words could sound without context, and for the first time, he realized that telling you the truth meant admitting things that might genuinely hurt you. He almost hesitated again. Not because his feelings had changed, but because he imagined you hearing that he had tried to declare your connection finished while secretly remaining attached to it. He knew you could reasonably ask, "If I mattered that much, why did you choose someone else?" And there was no beautiful answer waiting for that question. Only an uncomfortable one. He had been afraid. Afraid you no longer wanted him. Afraid of confronting his mistakes. Afraid that reaching for you and being rejected would hurt more than pretending he had moved on. So he chose the easier road, and the easier road eventually became the crueler one. That realization finally stripped away the last excuse he had been holding on to. If he wanted you to understand who he was now, he couldn't hide who he had been then. But the third party was already moving faster than he expected. After her first attempt failed to gain the reaction she wanted, she prepared a more personal version of the story, one designed specifically to make you believe you had only become important again because their connection was collapsing. She thought that would be enough to make you close your heart before hearing anything else. Then something happened she hadn't planned for. Someone who knew the timeline remembered exactly when his behavior toward her began changing, and it was much earlier than yesterday. That single detail could dismantle the entire revenge narrative. Because if his emotional withdrawal had started long before their breakdown, then she could no longer claim he suddenly remembered you after losing her. And when she realized someone else could prove that, she made a desperate decision that even he never believed she would make. Her desperate decision was to confront that person before the truth could travel any further. She wanted to know exactly what they remembered, what they had noticed, and whether they intended to tell anyone. But the conversation quickly became something she couldn't control. The person reminded her of a night weeks earlier when he had suddenly become distant after hearing something connected to you. They remembered how his entire mood changed, how he stopped participating in the conversation, and how she immediately became anxious. At the time, she had brushed it off as stress. Now the memory had a completely different meaning. His emotional shift had started long before yesterday's confrontation, and she knew it. Worse, someone else knew it too. Her claim that he only turned back toward you after losing her was beginning to collapse before she could even use it. For the first time, revenge began costing her the one thing she needed most: credibility. Every attempt to prove you were suddenly interfering only exposed how long she had actually been worried about you. And that forced her to face something even more painful. She had seen the warning signs before. She had noticed him becoming unusually quiet whenever your memory surfaced. She had noticed that certain questions made him defensive, not because he hated you, but because he didn't want anyone examining what he still felt. She had even asked him once whether there was someone from his past he would choose differently if he could go back. He never answered. Back then, she convinced herself his silence meant nothing. Yesterday taught her otherwise. Now she understood that she hadn't suddenly discovered his unresolved feelings. She had been avoiding the evidence because accepting it would have meant admitting she could never force his heart into becoming something it wasn't. And while she was confronting that reality, he finally stopped preparing and started acting. He decided there would be no carefully polished story designed to make himself look innocent. If he reached you, he would admit that he tried to forget you through someone else, that it failed, and that another person was hurt because he refused to face the truth sooner. But before he could take the next step, one unexpected message reached him. It came from the very person the third party had just confronted, and it contained a warning about what she might do next. Don't skip, because this wasn't simply another attempt to make you doubt him. According to that warning, she had realized she could no longer control the timeline, so she was preparing to reveal one private detail about his feelings for you that he had never intended anyone else to know. The private detail was something he had admitted only once, during a moment when he believed no one would ever repeat it. Long before yesterday's breakdown, the third party had asked him why he could never seem completely present with her. He tried to avoid answering, but eventually one sentence escaped: he was afraid that if he ever saw you again, everything he had worked so hard to suppress would come rushing back. She had carried those words silently ever since. At first, she treated them like an insecurity she could eventually overcome. Now they felt like proof that she had been standing beside someone whose heart was still facing another direction. And in her anger, she considered sending those exact words to you. Not because they made him look cruel, but because she hoped they would make you question why he had stayed away if his feelings were truly that strong. But there was another piece she planned to leave out. He hadn't stayed away because you meant too little. In his own confused reasoning, he stayed away because you meant enough to frighten him. Reconnecting would force him to face whether you had forgiven him, whether your life had changed, and whether there was still any place for him in it. The third party knew that context, but revenge had made selective truth feel more useful than complete truth. Yet as she prepared to expose him, something unexpected happened inside her. She reread the words she intended to use against him and realized they didn't prove what she wanted them to prove. They showed that his feelings for you had survived even during the period when she believed she was replacing them. If you saw those words, you might not turn against him. You might finally understand why his behavior had been so contradictory. That possibility terrified her, and suddenly she hesitated. For the first time since breaking down, she understood that exposing every secret might actually bring you closer to the truth instead of pushing you away from him. Meanwhile, he had already decided he would rather risk losing you through honesty than keep you through another carefully edited story. He began preparing to reveal the one thing even the third party didn't fully understand. There had been a specific moment when he finally realized using another connection to forget you would never work. Something huge was waiting inside that memory, because it wasn't triggered by seeing you, hearing from you, or learning that you wanted him back. It happened when you were completely absent, and what he felt in that moment was so undeniable that he knew, from then on, he was living a lie. The third party had been standing right beside him when it happened, without realizing what she was witnessing. That moment had looked completely ordinary from the outside. They were together, talking about plans they were supposed to be excited about, when someone casually mentioned a place connected to a memory he shared with you. He froze for barely a second, but she noticed. Then he smiled, changed the subject, and tried to continue as though nothing had happened. What she didn't know was that the mention had brought back one tiny memory with startling clarity, not some dramatic goodbye, but an ordinary moment with you when he had felt completely understood without needing to explain himself. Sitting beside someone new, he suddenly realized he had been chasing that same feeling everywhere else. And no matter how hard he tried to manufacture it, it wasn't appearing. That was the moment he first admitted privately that moving on and replacing someone were two very different things. After that day, his behavior slowly changed. He became quieter whenever she discussed their future. He stopped making promises he wasn't certain he could keep. Sometimes she would catch him staring into the distance after an otherwise happy moment, and she began sensing that something inside him was pulling backward. Yesterday's breakdown hadn't created that conflict. It had simply exposed what had been growing for weeks. And now she could finally trace everything back to that ordinary conversation. The realization humiliated her because she remembered exactly how hard she had tried afterward to become more important to him. More attention. More reassurance. More plans. But none of it touched the real problem. She wasn't fighting another woman's presence. She was fighting a memory he had never properly faced, and every attempt to force it away only made him more aware of what was missing. Then she remembered something else from that same day, something she had dismissed until now. After the conversation ended, he had stepped away alone for several minutes. When he returned, his expression looked different, heavy, almost decided. She assumed he needed space. But now she wondered what he had actually done during those few minutes. That question became impossible to ignore, because later she discovered there had been an unfinished action connected to you from that exact time. He had started something and stopped before completing it. Don't skip, because this was no longer about whether he had thought of you. She already knew that answer. The real mystery was what he had almost done when those buried feelings finally became impossible to deny. And when the third party learned how close he had come to following through, she realized yesterday wasn't the first time she had nearly lost him to the truth. What he had almost done that day was far more revealing than she expected. He had started writing something meant for you. Not a dramatic promise. Not a demand for another chance. Just the beginning of an honest message admitting that time had not erased what he thought it would. He wrote a few lines, stared at them, and stopped. Fear took over before courage could. He imagined you reading those words and saying nothing. He imagined discovering that you had finally moved beyond him while he was still emotionally trapped in what he had lost. So he deleted what he had started and returned to the third party as though nothing had happened. She remembered his face when he came back. At the time, she thought he was distracted. Now she understood she had been standing only minutes away from a decision that could have changed everything. That discovery hurt her differently because it destroyed the last comforting story she had been telling herself. She could no longer claim his feelings for you returned only after their relationship began falling apart. He had nearly reached for you while she still believed everything between them was secure. And suddenly, yesterday's breakdown made perfect sense. She hadn't discovered one shocking secret, she had discovered a pattern. Every time he tried harder to forget you, something inside him pushed back. Every time he convinced himself that silence meant closure, another memory challenged him. But there was one difference now. Back then, fear had stopped him. Yesterday had changed that. Losing control of the situation had forced him to see what hesitation was costing everyone, including her. And she could feel that this time, he wasn't preparing to delete his truth and quietly return. That realization pushed her toward the most unpredictable stage of her revenge. Part of her still wanted to interfere, but another part wanted him to experience exactly what she had experienced, to believe something was possible and then watch it disappear. So instead of exposing his feelings immediately, she considered waiting until he finally reached toward you and then revealing something at the precise moment it could hurt most. But she made one mistake. She assumed he was still the frightened person who had deleted that earlier message. He wasn't. This time, he had made peace with the possibility that you might reject him. He wasn't approaching you because he expected a guaranteed reunion, he was doing it because hiding had become unbearable. And then the third party discovered one final difference between that unfinished message and what he was preparing now. This time, he wasn't only planning to tell you that he never forgot you. He was preparing to reveal the exact reason he had tried so desperately to forget you in the first place. The reason was more complicated than simply being afraid of rejection. After everything changed between you, he had convinced himself that holding on to you was preventing him from functioning normally. Every reminder brought back questions he couldn't answer. What if he had handled things differently? What if he had spoken sooner? What if the distance between you had grown because he waited for certainty that never came? Eventually, he decided the only way to quiet those questions was to create a completely different emotional life. That was when the third party entered the picture. Her attention gave him somewhere else to focus. Her presence filled the silence. And because the distraction worked temporarily, he mistook relief for healing. But yesterday forced him to admit something he had resisted for far too long. You cannot build something honest with another person when part of your heart is secretly using that connection as an escape route. When the third party finally understood this, her anger shifted again. She wasn't only furious that he still cared about you. She was furious because she realized he had never entered their connection from the same emotional starting point she had. She had been trying to create a future while he had been trying to outrun a past. That difference explained almost every confusing moment between them. Why he could be affectionate one day and distant the next. Why deeper commitment seemed to make him uneasy instead of excited. Why mentioning you created tension he could never explain. But then she asked herself a question that frightened her. If he had been using their connection to forget you, what would happen now that he had stopped trying to forget? The answer appeared in his behavior almost immediately. He wasn't searching for another distraction. He wasn't begging her to stay. He was finally standing still long enough to face what he had avoided. And that was when she realized revenge had become her last form of control. She couldn't make him love differently, but she could still try to influence what happened when the truth reached you. So she prepared one final move, something more calculated than the emotional threats she had considered before. She wanted to place one piece of information in your path at exactly the right time, hoping it would make you question whether his honesty had arrived too late to matter. But she didn't know he had already anticipated that possibility. Before taking his next step, he made sure there was one thing she could never successfully twist, the timeline of when his feelings began resurfacing and what he had done about them. And when she discovered how he intended to prove that timeline, she froze, because the evidence came from a moment she remembered very clearly, and it revealed something he had done for you while she still believed he was choosing her. The evidence came from a day she had once considered proof that their relationship was becoming stronger. He had been unusually quiet that morning, but later he disappeared for a short time and returned looking calmer. She assumed he had simply needed space. What she never knew was that during those minutes, he had made a private decision connected to you. He had taken something he once planned to erase, a reminder of your connection, and deliberately kept it. Not because he expected you to return, but because destroying it suddenly felt dishonest. He finally admitted to himself that pretending you had meant nothing would not change what had happened between you. That decision had a date. A moment. A clear place in the timeline. And it happened while the third party still believed he was successfully forgetting you. Now she understood why he had become different afterward. He had stopped trying to destroy the past, even though he still lacked the courage to face it. That detail completely weakened the story she had planned to tell. She wanted you to believe he only began thinking about you after she pulled away, but the timeline showed something else. His internal shift had started much earlier. And the more she examined those weeks, the more evidence she remembered herself. The unfinished conversations. The reluctance to make deeper promises. The moments when he seemed guilty after she spoke confidently about their future. Suddenly, revenge required her to ignore things she personally knew were true. That realization created an uncomfortable battle inside her. She was still hurt. She still believed he had treated her unfairly. And in many ways, he had. But hurting you would not.